The wall clock in the waiting room said 10:58, but it wasn't the time that got me. It was the sound, the steady tap, 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 of my son's shoe bouncing against the vinyl floor. Small, fast beats, nervous energy. Meanwhile, my hands stayed locked around the paper cup of coffee that had gone cold 15 minutes ago. And across from us, Calvin sat like he belonged there, slouched, legs crossed, flipping through a magazine as if this was a dentist's office, not a family court hearing where he was trying to take guardianship of my kid. My brother-in-law had always been like that, relaxed in the face of other people's panic. But I wasn't panicking anymore. That was earlier, when the papers came in the mail. That was when I still believed we were on the same side. Let me back up. My name's Eric Dempsey, 41, widower, warehouse supervisor, and father to a 12-year-old boy named Miles, who means more to me than anything else on this planet. My wife, Jenna, passed away just over 2 years ago. Breast cancer. She fought like hell. I don't like to talk about it, but I will say this. She made me promise 2 things on her last good day. 1, don't shut down. Keep showing up for Miles, even on the days you want to disappear. 2, if anything happens to me, please be civil to my brother. That second one? Yeah, I tried, for her sake. But this wasn't just not being civil. This was betrayal with a smile. The letter came on a Monday, a plain white envelope from the county clerk's office. Inside, a petition for transfer of guardianship. Calvin, my brother-in-law, had filed paperwork claiming I was unfit to raise Miles, said I'd become emotionally unstable since Jenna died, claimed my work hours left Miles neglected, and that he had evidence to back it up. He wanted to be named legal guardian, full custody, rights to make decisions, access to Miles's medical, educational, and financial life. And the kicker? He said Miles had verbally expressed a preference to live with him. I remember reading those words and my vision tunneling. My kid had never said that, never even hinted at it. I didn't confront Calvin right away. I did something smarter. I called a lawyer. A guy named Marty Price, old school, gruff, and way sharper than he looked in his rumpled corduroy blazer. You ever get arrested? He asked after our first sit-down. No. Ever lay hands on your kid in anger? No. Ever leave him home alone, underage, pull a no-show at a school meeting, get flagged for truancy, drugs, abuse? No, none of that. Then he's got no case. But we can't assume the court will see that unless we paint the full picture. And that's when I realized I had to go to war for something that should never have been on trial in the first place. The first pre-hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. That's where we were. Me, Miles, and Calvin in that narrow wood-paneled room with the humming fluorescent lights and the stale air that made everything feel more artificial than it already was. They told us this wasn't a full hearing, just an initial review. A time for both parties to state intent, hand over preliminary documents, and for the court to assign a guardian ad litem, basically a third-party attorney tasked with investigating what would be best for Miles. Her name was Hannah Whitmore, and I'll be honest, I didn't like her at first. Too calm, too neutral. She shook everyone's hand the same way, nodded politely, didn't blink twice at Calvin's smiling introduction or his slick little folder of evidence. I wanted her to see through him right away. She didn't. And that scared the hell out of me. The evidence Calvin submitted looked clean at first glance. He had screenshots of text messages from Miles asking if he could come over because I was late again. He had photos of our front yard with overgrown grass and garbage cans tipped over. Made it seem like my house was neglected. He even included a note from Jenna's old therapist, cherry-picked to suggest I was emotionally avoidant after her passing. But here's what he didn't show. That Miles had been texting him that day because I was stuck at work covering a last-minute shipment for a sick coworker, and I'd already arranged for our neighbor to check in on him. That the messy yard photo was taken the day after a windstorm that knocked half the neighborhood's trash bins over. And I'd cleaned it the next morning. That Jenna's therapist had told me, in private, that she stopped seeing Calvin after one session because he kept redirecting the conversation to himself. But context? It's slippery in court. And Calvin was banking on that. I didn't sleep much the week following the first review. Miles noticed. He wasn't dumb. "Is Uncle Calvin mad at you?" he asked one night while brushing his teeth. I kept my voice even. "No, buddy. Just a disagreement." He looked at me through the mirror. "Is he mad about Mom?" That caught me off guard. "Why do you say that?" "Because he talks about her like she's still here. He says weird stuff sometimes, like, 'Your mom would have wanted you to live in a quieter house.' Stuff like that." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger, protective instinct. "Did he ever ask you to say anything about living with him?" Miles frowned. "He told me that if I ever felt uncomfortable at home, I could tell a judge I wanted to live with him, and it'd be fine." There it was. Not a direct lie, just enough suggestion to plant a seed in a kid's head. Marty prepped me for the guardian ad litem's first home visit. Be yourself. Don't try to stage the place. If you suddenly install a bunch of fake, wholesome dad crap, she'll smell it. Clean, but not fake clean. Make sure there's food. Show consistency. I took his advice. We didn't overdo it. Miles's schoolwork was taped to the fridge. His sneakers were by the door. The dinner table had a few scratches and one wobbly leg we kept meaning to fix. It looked real, because it was. Hannah came by on a Thursday evening. She stayed an hour, asked Miles questions about his routine, school, friends, talked to me about work, parenting challenges, how we handled grief. She didn't show her hand, not once. But as she left, she glanced at a photo on the wall, Jenna in her nurse scrubs, holding newborn Miles, and she smiled. That's when I allowed myself the tiniest sliver of hope. Hope is dangerous in situations like this, because the next week, Calvin escalated. He submitted a character affidavit, 3 pages from a former neighbor who claimed I was withdrawn and possibly depressed, that she'd heard raised voices from our home, and that she once saw Miles walking home alone. None of that was illegal. But when read without context, it could sound like neglect. Marty responded hard. He filed for those statements to be dismissed as inadmissible character opinion and included statements from Miles's teachers, our pediatrician, and our neighbor, the current one, who actually knows us, all of whom backed me up. Still, Calvin kept spinning straw into suspicion. He even posted a Facebook status, vague but pointed. It's not about winning. It's about protecting the kids. Some people need to learn that. It got 37 likes and 5 heart emojis. The lowest point came the day Miles came home from school with a pamphlet in his backpack, a printed-out flyer for adjusting to a new home environment. I asked him where he got it. He shrugged. "Uncle Calvin gave it to me. Said it was just in case." That night, I sat at the kitchen table, my head in my hands, while Miles played video games in the other room. I was doing everything right. I had legal representation. I was showing up to every hearing. I had documentation. And still, he was getting to my son. He was slowly undermining me, chipping away trust by acting like the backup plan who just cares. I hated him for it. And more than that, I hated how good he was at pretending he didn't mean any harm. The turning point came when Hannah requested an unannounced visit. She showed up on a Saturday afternoon just as I was folding laundry, and Miles was on a video call with his best friend. The house wasn't perfect. There were dishes in the sink, a dog toy under the couch, but it was alive, functional, honest. She stayed a while, watched us make grilled cheese, talked about summer plans, saw the way Miles joked with me, saw how we argued gently about bedtime and screen time and toothpaste caps. And finally, she asked me, "What would you do if the court ruled against you?" I didn't try to play strong. I said, I'd respect it because I'd have to. But I'd never stop being his father. And I'd make damn sure he knew I was still in his corner, always. She nodded once, then said, "That's the first answer I've heard all month that didn't sound rehearsed." The courtroom smelled like old wood and printer toner. Second hearing. I wore the same suit I wore to Jenna's funeral. Dark navy, modest tie, sleeves slightly too long. I hadn't put it on since that day. It still held a hint of her lavender detergent, and if I'm honest, that smell kept me upright longer than any prep speech from Marty. Across the aisle, Calvin looked relaxed, of course. He wore a pale blue shirt open at the collar, no tie, leaning back in his chair like a man applying for a job he already assumed was his. He even gave me a nod, like this was just some friendly disagreement between brothers-in-law, not a full-blown attempt to take my son away. The second hearing was longer, heavier. We weren't at trial yet, but this was the status conference, where both legal teams reviewed submitted evidence with the judge and discussed whether a settlement or mediation was possible. No one wanted mediation, especially not Calvin. Because the truth is, mediation only works when both parties believe in compromise. And Calvin? He believed in narratives. And his was simple. Eric's a broken man. I'm the stable one. Miles deserves stability. It sounded noble on paper, but I knew better. Calvin didn't want custody out of love. He wanted it because Jenna had always picked me. Because Miles looked more like her than him. Because, in Calvin's world, being second was never enough. Judge Rhonda Kessler presided. Late 50s, sharp features, wore glasses halfway down her nose like a librarian who didn't tolerate nonsense. She listened more than she spoke. She didn't lean into drama, and that made her harder to read. She opened the session with a clear warning. This is a guardianship dispute, not a popularity contest. If either party is found to be acting in bad faith, the court will pursue remedies. Calvin's lawyer, a silver-tongued guy named Peter Alcott, stood up and delivered a syrupy version of Calvin's story. He described Calvin as a present, successful, emotionally available adult with a track record of volunteering, donating to school fundraisers, and, get this, acting in loco parentis during Eric's period of grieving. In loco parentis, I muttered under my breath. Marty gave me a warning look. "Let it go," he whispered. Then it was our turn. Marty didn't do flair. He went fact by fact, detailed Miles's school attendance, his grades, medical appointments kept, dental records, counseling sessions attended, every item lined up with my name on it. Then he handed over the counter affidavits. From the pediatrician, the principal, our neighbor, and even a youth counselor who ran the grief group Miles had briefly attended. "These are not the markings of a neglected child," Marty said, turning toward the judge. "They are the markings of a grieving but supported one." Then he added the final card. "We believe the petitioner has manipulated the minor to influence opinion. We have evidence that printed materials about custody were given to the child without parental consent." He placed the pamphlet from Miles's backpack gently on the desk. The judge raised an eyebrow at Calvin. Peter Alcott objected, claiming hearsay. Judge Kessler waved it off. "I'll consider context in chambers." The hearing adjourned for lunch. We weren't done, just paused. I went outside with Marty. He lit a cigarette, even though he was trying to quit. "Why do I get the feeling that Calvin's not afraid of court?" I asked. Marty took a drag. "Because he's not." "Then what the hell is he after?" He exhaled slowly. "Control. Reputation. You said it yourself. He was never first in Jenna's life. This is the last crown he can grab. If he walks away with legal custody, in his mind, it means he wins the long game." I looked down at the courthouse steps. Miles would be out of school in 2 hours. He had no idea how close this was getting. I felt a stab of guilt just picturing his face. That night, I sat Miles down. We were eating takeout, pizza from that corner place Jenna used to love. He picked off the mushrooms, always did. "Hey," I said gently, "can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Have you told anyone you want to live with Uncle Calvin?" He blinked. "What? No." "Not even once? Not even as a joke or in frustration?" "No. Why would I?" I hesitated. "He says you did." Miles narrowed his eyes. "I didn't." I pushed the pizza box aside. "I believe you, but I need to ask you something else, and I want you to be really honest." "Okay." "Do you ever feel like I don't show up for you?" He leaned back, chewing the inside of his cheek. Then he said, "Sometimes I miss Mom so much I get mad at you. But it's not because of you. It's just because she's not here." I nodded. "I get that. And sometimes I feel like you don't know what you're doing." That one hurt. "But," he continued, "I also know you're trying, and you always come back, even when you're tired, even when you mess up." I looked down. The inside of my chest felt like it cracked a little. "I guess that's all I need to know," I said. The court ordered a final guardian ad litem report by the end of the month. Hannah's visits had totaled 4. 2 planned, 2 surprise. She talked to everyone. School staff, neighbors, even Jenna's old nurse friends who knew the family dynamics. Her report would carry weight. It wouldn't be the final decision, but the judge could lean on it heavily. That week I got a call. It was Hannah. "Eric, I'm not supposed to share my report ahead of the submission, but I want to let you know. Your house was the only one where I saw a kid who felt safe enough to say no." I blinked. "Say no?" "Yes." He pushed back. He argued about chores. He rolled his eyes. That tells me he feels like he has space to be himself. I didn't say anything. Just let the silence stretch. "I also found some discrepancies in Calvin's statement history," she added. "What kind? You'll find out in court." The final hearing was approaching, but before that, something happened I didn't expect. Calvin showed up at my house. It was a Sunday afternoon. Miles was at a friend's birthday party. I was folding laundry. There was a knock. I opened the door and saw him standing there, smug as ever, holding a manila envelope. "What do you want?" He didn't flinch. "We need to talk." "No, we don't. I'm offering you a chance to walk away without embarrassment." I stared at him. "You think I'm worried about embarrassment?" He held out the envelope. Inside is a draft agreement. You give up physical custody. Keep legal access. Miles visits every weekend. You get to play the cool dad without the pressure. I didn't take it. Just looked him in the eye. "Get off my porch, Calvin." He didn't move. "You're going to lose. You're unstable. That kid needs someone who knows how to run a household. He needs someone who doesn't treat him like a prize." Calvin finally stepped back. "Last chance, Eric." I shut the door in his face. That week, Miles caught a cold. Nothing serious, just a bug going around. But Calvin found out. Called the school, then texted me. "Unwell child being kept in unhealthy home. I'll be filing a health and wellness report." It didn't work. I had documentation of the doctor's visit, the prescribed meds, the school nurse's sign-off. Still, it rattled me. He wasn't stopping, and he wouldn't. Not until a judge told him to. The night before the final hearing, I sat with Miles on the couch. He was watching some dumb YouTube video. I wasn't even paying attention. I just kept watching his profile, the way his nose crinkled when he laughed, the way his hair curled like Jenna's had, the way his body was slowly shifting from little boy to young man. "I'm proud of you," I said, out of nowhere. He looked at me. "What for?" For showing up. For being honest. For being strong. He shrugged. That's just being alive, right? I smiled. But inside, I prayed that the court saw what I saw. A kid worth fighting for. A family worth holding on to. The morning of the final hearing started with a loose button on my shirt cuff. Of all things. I was already dressed, tie knotted, hair combed, and there it was. Dangling, threatening to pop off. It felt symbolic. Fraying at the edge. Barely holding. I took a breath, pulled out a safety pin from Jenna's old sewing kit, and fastened it in place. It wasn't elegant, but it would hold. Sometimes, you patch what you can and walk in anyway. Miles stayed home that day. School excused him for the court appearance, but per Hannah's advice, he wouldn't be in the courtroom. Instead, he'd be with Ms. Lilly, our neighbor, the one who'd written the character affidavit backing me up. She baked muffins that morning just for him. Banana chocolate chip. I'd packed his backpack myself. Phone, charger, a comic book, water bottle, one of Jenna's old beanies, the one he still wore when he got nervous. I kissed the top of his head before I left and said, "No matter what, I love you. That's permanent." He looked up, eyes steady. "You got this, Dad." The courtroom was fuller than before. Court officers, 2 other families with pending custody reviews. Calvin was already seated when I arrived. He had a haircut. That detail stuck with me. Trimmed sides, freshly styled. His clothes were ironed, shoes polished. He looked like a man preparing for a photo op. His lawyer, Peter, adjusted his glasses and nodded toward Marty when we walked in. Polite. Cold. Judge Kessler entered at 9 on the dot. No robe drama, just a nod and, "Let's proceed." The first part was procedural, confirmation of documents, attendance, and acknowledgement of the guardian ad litem's final report submission. Hannah was there, seated at the side table, expression unreadable. Judge Kessler motioned to her. "Ms. Whitmore, you may read your summary." Hannah stood, placed her hands lightly on her file, and spoke clearly. No theatrics, no hesitation. "I visited both residences multiple times, interviewed both parties, consulted school officials, healthcare providers, neighbors, and the minor child." She paused, looked briefly at me, then at Calvin. "In my professional judgment, the minor's primary home environment, with Mr. Eric Dempsey, demonstrates consistency, emotional availability, and a clear parental bond." Calvin shifted slightly in his chair. She continued, "While the petitioner, Mr. Calvin Monroe, has maintained a stable personal residence and expresses concern for the child's well-being, there is evidence of suggestive language toward the minor regarding custody. These attempts may have influenced the minor's perceptions without context or full understanding." Peter objected. Judge Kessler held up a hand. "She's not making a ruling. She's reporting. Continue." Hannah concluded, "It is my recommendation that sole guardianship remain with Mr. Eric Dempsey, and that any future consideration for shared custody should only proceed under mutual agreement and with court review." My chest didn't rise, didn't fall. I held my breath the entire time. Then, slowly, I exhaled, but I knew better than to celebrate. This wasn't over. Peter stood pacing slowly as he spoke. "Your Honor, the ad litem's opinion is one voice. It's important, of course, but it does not outweigh the larger concern, the child's long-term emotional and educational well-being." He turned to me. "We have here a man who has suffered significant personal loss, who works long, inconsistent hours, who, by his own admission, has faced struggles with grief, routine, and emotional expression." He turned back to the judge. "The petitioner, by contrast, offers a calm, stable 2-parent home, a flexible work-from-home schedule, financial resources, a backyard, a private room, and immediate access to therapy." He let that list linger like bullet points on a slide deck. This is not an attack on Mr. Dempsey's character. It's an argument for what's optimal for the child's future. Marty didn't flinch. He stood, hands in his pockets. With respect, Your Honor, this isn't about what's optimal. This is about what is already functioning. He stepped forward. We have a child who is not just surviving, but thriving. Despite loss, he's attending school regularly. He's connected to his community. He has a support network. He turned toward Calvin. What he doesn't need is upheaval disguised as opportunity. Then Marty looked at the judge and said, "And if I may, we have one more submission." He handed over a printed document. Judge Kessler took it, skimmed the first page, and looked up. "This is a transcript?" "Yes, Your Honor, from a recorded conversation between the minor child and his uncle. It was collected by the court-appointed counselor with consent after a supervised session." Peter stood. "Objection. Overruled," said the judge. "This is from the counselor's office?" "Yes." The judge read a portion out loud. "Uncle Calvin said I should think about living with him. He said if I did, I'd probably get a dog and maybe a trip to Disney, but only if I asked for it before the court thing." The room went dead silent. Even Calvin looked stunned. Not guilty, just caught. The judge closed the file. She didn't lecture, didn't raise her voice. "Mr. Monroe," she said, "you're not accused of a crime. But this court does not reward manipulation. You used adult influence over a minor in an active custody proceeding. That's a breach of trust toward the court and the child." She turned to me. "Mr. Dempsey, this proceeding has made one thing very clear. Despite grief, despite difficult circumstances, you have maintained a steady, consistent presence in your child's life." Then she looked at both of us. "This court hereby rules that sole guardianship remains with Eric Dempsey. No joint arrangement will be considered at this time. Any future petitions must demonstrate substantial change in circumstances and shall be subject to enhanced scrutiny." The gavel didn't slam. It just clicked. One quiet sound, that meant everything. Afterward, I didn't look at Calvin, didn't shake his hand, didn't gloat. I walked straight out of that courtroom, stepped into the sunlight, and called Ms. Lilly to let Miles know. "He's already smiling," she said. "He said, 'Told you.'" I laughed, but tears came anyway. That night, Miles and I ate dinner at home. No ceremony, just frozen lasagna and chocolate milk. He sat across from me, swinging his legs under the table. "I heard you won," he said, mouth full. "It's not about winning," I replied. He raised an eyebrow. "So, who gets the dog?" I smirked. "We'll talk about it." I thought that would be the end of it. The gavel had dropped. The ruling was clear. Guardianship was mine, sole and uncontested. No mediation, no shared arrangement, no revisiting the matter without significant new evidence. But Calvin? He didn't back off. If anything, the court decision seemed to bruise something deeper than his ego, something festering behind the well-tailored shirts and pleasant smiles. Maybe he believed he really was the better option, or maybe he just couldn't stand the idea of someone else being seen as the one Jenna trusted most. But within a week, the fallout started. The first sign was subtle, a voicemail from my boss. "Hey, Eric, just checking in. I got a call from someone asking about your shift schedule. Said it was for a background check related to some volunteer application. Just sounded odd. Thought you should know." I hadn't applied for any volunteer work, and I definitely hadn't listed my boss as a reference. I didn't have to guess. Calvin was fishing, trying to drum up evidence post-ruling, hoping something would stick. Marty had warned me, some folks lose in court, but keep the battle alive in other ways, especially if they're used to winning without ever being challenged. Then came the school incident. Miles came home one Thursday with a notice in his backpack, a request to meet with the school guidance counselor, followed by a note that someone had called expressing concern about stress at home due to a legal matter. I sat across from Ms. Bennett, the school counselor, the next day. She was polite, professional, but firm. "Eric, I have no reason to doubt your parenting," she said. "Miles is performing well, shows up on time, and interacts normally. But when we get anonymous reports, we're required to document and investigate. Standard procedure." I asked if Calvin had made the call. She wouldn't say. "But," she added gently, "I think you should be aware that the language used in the report mirrored terms from a recent custody petition. Phrases like parental instability and emotional absenteeism, not common for a random community concern." I left the school boiling inside, not because of the investigation. We had nothing to hide, but because Calvin wasn't done. He was trying to win the argument by outlasting the verdict. I didn't tell Miles everything, but kids aren't stupid. One night while we were doing dishes, him drying, me washing, he asked, "Is Uncle Calvin still mad?" I kept my voice calm. "He's having a hard time accepting the court's decision." "Is he going to keep trying to get me?" "No," I said. Then I corrected myself. "He might try other things, but the court's made its ruling. You're with me. That's not changing." He looked down at the plate in his hands, then nodded. After a beat, he said, "I don't want to see him for a while." I didn't push. I just said, "Okay." A week later, Calvin emailed me. The subject line, "For Jenna's sake." It read like a performance, part guilt trip, part bait. He wrote about how Jenna would have wanted us to stay close, how family matters more than courtrooms, and how he hoped I could put aside resentment and allow visits again. No apology, no acknowledgement of what he'd tried to do, just more of the same sanitized self-justification that had always made my skin crawl. I didn't respond, not because I was trying to be cold, but because I was done playing by his script. But then came the part that crossed the line. A week later, I got a text from Miles. "Uncle Calvin picked me up from school. Said you said it was okay?" I froze. I had said no such thing. It was a half day due to a teacher conference. I was scheduled to pick Miles up at 12:30. When I got there, he was gone. I called Ms. Bennett in a panic. She said Calvin had arrived with confidence, said he was Miles's uncle, and had permission from the father. Said Miles was expecting him. The office staff hadn't checked with me directly. Calvin had forged confidence. Again. I called Miles immediately. He was confused, but not afraid. "We're getting ice cream," he said. "He said you were running late." I told him, calmly but firmly, "Stay there, I'm coming." When I arrived at the ice cream shop, Calvin was seated with Miles at a booth near the window. He smiled when he saw me, like this was just some casual uncle-nephew hangout. I walked up, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "Step outside now." He sipped his coffee. "Relax, Eric. He's safe. I thought you could use the help. Calvin, outside." He stood, reluctantly, and we stepped out into the parking lot. It was cold, overcast, wind brushing leaves across the concrete. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just said, "You don't ever pick my son up without my permission again. Ever." He rolled his eyes. "You're being dramatic." "No, you're being reckless. This isn't a game, Calvin. I'm his uncle. I have every right." "No, you don't. You had your shot in court. You lost. Respect it." He squared up, eyes narrowed. "She would have wanted me involved." I paused, then said quietly, "She would have wanted you to respect her son's safety." That silenced him. For the first time, he actually looked unsure. After that, I called Marty. He was livid. "You need to file a formal cease and desist, now, and get the school updated, in writing, that no one picks up Miles but you unless cleared through the office." We did both. The school was apologetic, tightened their policy immediately. We sent the letter via certified mail. Legal language. No wiggle room. Any further interference would be grounds for a restraining order. A month passed. Quiet. For once, Calvin didn't call, didn't text, didn't hover. His social media went quiet. No cryptic status updates. No mutual friends calling me with concerns. And I almost believed it was over. Then, Miles got an invitation in the mail. A glossy, expensive-looking envelope addressed in cursive handwriting. Inside, a card for Uncle Calvin's spring celebration, complete with RSVP details, a dinner menu, and a line that read, "Special toast to Jenna and the strong family she left behind." There was a handwritten note. "Miles, I'd love for you to come. I know your mom would be proud of the young man you're becoming. We're always your home, too." Miles handed me the envelope with a frown. "I don't want to go," he said, "but do I have to?" I shook my head. "No, you don't." We didn't respond, and the event came and went without further incident. But the message was clear. Calvin wasn't trying to rebuild a relationship. He was trying to maintain an audience. He couldn't win in court, so he'd try to win in narrative. I just had to keep Miles close, keep the facts straight, keep the door locked from the inside, but never sealed shut, because Miles would grow up. He'd form his own opinions, and I didn't want to turn his memories into a battlefield. I just wanted him to know where home was. One night, a few weeks later, we were watching a movie. One of those superhero flicks, cheesy but fun. And midway through, Miles paused it and asked, "Do you think Mom would be okay with how things are now?" It caught me off guard. I thought for a second, then said, "I think she'd be heartbroken that we've had to go through this, but I also think she'd be proud of you, of how honest you've been, how strong you've stayed." He nodded, then said, "And you?" I smiled. "I think she'd be proud of both of us." He leaned against me on the couch. Didn't say anything after that. We let the movie keep playing. You'd think court rulings close chapters, but in real life, closure doesn't come with a gavel. It comes slow, like grass regrowing after a wildfire, quietly, stubbornly from the bottom up. It had been 3 months since the court ruled in my favor. Calvin had gone quiet. No calls, no emails, no surprise visits. His lawyer didn't file any appeals. The legal process was over. But I still walked around like it wasn't, like I was bracing for a punch that never landed. That kind of tension doesn't just disappear, especially not when you've spent a year fighting someone who once sat at your dinner table. Miles had changed too. He didn't say it outright, but he carried himself differently. Less trust in adults outside our home. More questions, sharper edges. I'd catch him side-eyeing people who asked too many questions, holding his phone a little closer, double-checking pickup plans. It wasn't paranoia. It was the residue of being treated like a bargaining chip. A 12-year-old doesn't forget when someone they trusted tried to reframe their life without asking them first. I saw the weight on him, and I made a decision. It started with a phone call, not to Calvin, to Jenna's parents. We hadn't spoken much since the ruling. Their stance had always been diplomatic. But that wasn't enough anymore. I called on a Saturday morning. Jenna's mom, Margaret, picked up. "Hi, Margaret, it's Eric." A pause. "Eric, hello, how are you both?" "We're getting there." Another pause. Then she asked, "Is this about the hearing?" "No, it's about everything after." I explained, briefly but clearly, what had happened since the court ruling. The fake school pickup, the party invitation, the pressure on Miles. I didn't ask them to take sides. I just wanted them to know. There was silence on the other end. Then Margaret said, very quietly, "He didn't tell us any of that." A week later, they came to visit. For the first time in over a year, Jenna's parents sat in our kitchen again. Margaret brought a lemon tart. Miles was polite but quiet, his way of guarding space. Jenna's dad, Bill, said very little. But near the end of the visit, as we walked them to the door, he stopped and looked me in the eye. I was wrong to assume Calvin meant well. We trusted that he was just grieving differently, but he wasn't grieving. He was claiming. I nodded. Thank you for saying that. We're behind you now, both of you. And when they hugged Miles goodbye, he let it last longer than usual. Spring turned to summer. I changed my work hours, shifted to earlier mornings so I could be home by 4:30, just in time for Miles's baseball practices and video game rants and late-night cereal cravings. We were finally settling into peace. But just as the dust seemed to clear, one last thing surfaced, something I hadn't expected, and something Calvin never meant to be seen. It started with an email from a woman named Lori Baxter. Subject line, "I think you should see this." I nearly deleted it, but curiosity won. She introduced herself as a paralegal who used to work at Peter Alcott's firm, Calvin's lawyer. She said she wasn't violating any confidentiality agreements. She no longer worked there and wasn't revealing legal strategy, but she had found something on a shared drive that disturbed her. Attached was a PDF. It was a draft letter Calvin had asked his lawyer to prepare. The letter was addressed to the Department of Child Services, and it read like a formal complaint, full of manipulated facts, cherry-picked quotes, and alleged community concerns about a child in distress. It was never sent, but it was clear. He was planning to escalate again if the ruling hadn't gone his way. Lori's message ended like this: "I don't know you, but I saw a father doing everything right get dragged through the mud, and I saw someone else gearing up to ruin him if the court didn't take his side. That didn't sit right with me. Do whatever you want with this." I sat there, just staring at the screen, and for the first time in months, I felt a clean, final clarity. I didn't forward it to the court, didn't file charges, didn't threaten to expose him. I just saved it, quietly, in 2 places, because the truth didn't need to be shouted. It just needed to be kept intact. For Miles, for when the questions come later, for when he's older and the story starts to shift in whispers and half-truths. I'll have the receipts, not to punish, but to preserve. Miles turned 13 in July. We kept it simple. No big party, just a few friends, some grilled burgers, and a gift he didn't expect: a second-hand digital camera. He'd gotten into photography, said it helped him notice things better. That night, as he sat on the porch taking blurry shots of the sunset, he asked me, "Do you think I'll ever talk to Uncle Calvin again?" I paused. "I think that's up to you, Basim," I said. "You get to decide when and if and how, and I'll support whatever you choose." He nodded. "I don't hate him." "I know. I just don't want to feel like someone else gets to decide my story." "You don't," I said. "You write it, one picture at a time." The camera clicked. The sun dipped behind the trees. And for the first time since this all began, I let myself believe we were really free. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real-life confessions and emotional journeys like this one.